Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Leolya. Chapter 44. Ambush. Part 1. A man in navy blue martial arts robes, with 2 talismans of the 6 armor's total symbol on his forehead, chest, and abdomen, and 1 talisman of the thunder God seal symbol, continuously chanted spells with a tense expression. The twin brightness presides, the divine position holds authority. Absorbing the yin and embracing the yang, the dull and hidden form. Leading the spirits and acting alone, moving swiftly without hindrance. The noble horse possesses majestic power, the heavenly soldiers march forward. Hurry, hurry, in accordance with the law and order. The spell he was reciting was a type of concealment technique called the Western mantra. The man in navy blue robes, his face drenched in cold sweat, incessantly scanned his surroundings, maintaining vigilance. While chanting the spell, no one could detect his presence. The drawback was that he couldn't move and had to continuously recite the spell without rest. Damn it! He was filled with regret. He had thought that with his experience surpassing even Sack, and his ability to control the high-grade monster level 2 demons and 2 spirits, he could thoroughly uncover the truth as long as he was cautious. However, that had been his miscalculation. How could this happen? It wasn't at the green spirit level. There was absolutely no way that could be the case. If it were a green spirit, he could have somehow confronted it by combining his magical techniques with the power of his spirit servant, Gojo. Yet, in an instant, it had unraveled the binding technique he had cast and inflicted wounds upon him. The man's back was soaked in blood. Gojo. The spirit servant, Gojo, had lured that entity. It was to buy time for him. However, a problem had arisen. Thanks to the admirable spirit servant, he thought he could escape this situation, but he couldn't understand what was happening. Rustle, rustle. Who were these masked individuals? Thanks to the concealment technique, he could avoid their gazes, but they didn't seem to be the warriors of the Yun Moksword manner. If they were, there would be no reason for them to enter wearing masks in the middle of the night. The dull and hidden form, leading the spirits and acting alone, moving swiftly without hindrance. The noble horse possesses majestic power, the heavenly soldiers march forward. It was a difficult situation. Due to the blood loss from his back, his strength was gradually waning. For some unknown reason, these masked individuals were thoroughly searching every corner of the surroundings, looking for something. He had to endure until they disappeared, but it was extremely challenging. I must endure. Somehow. At that moment. What's that? A figure, distinctly different from the masked individuals searching the surroundings, revealed himself. It was a man wearing an eye patch and holding a walking stick. The moment he saw him, the man instinctively knew. A diviner? The extraordinary aura emanating from him. This was one of the characteristics that manifested in those who had cultivated magical techniques for a long time. Even if that weren't the case, the hand seal he had formed with his left hand alone was a fundamental of magical techniques. The art of pursuit? It was a spell used when one wanted to find a desired target. The man furrowed his brow. Seeing how the masked individuals naturally carried on with their task in the presence of the diviner, it was evident that they were all part of the same group. However, there was a crucial rule among diviners. They cultivated the principles of the Tao and practiced magical techniques, so they refrained from directly colluding with or joining any worldly organizations. Until just 10 years ago, this rule had been strictly adhered to. However, it was broken by someone and a group of diviners. Could it be? These masked individuals. Swish. Gasp. The man's breathing grew ragged. It was because the man with the eye patch was standing right in front of him. He was using a concealment technique, so it should have been impossible to detect him, but he couldn't understand what was happening. As he was perplexed, the diviner with the eye patch spoke. If you wanted to use a concealment technique, you should have completely erased your traces. Traces? Ah. The man finally realized. The blood flowing from his back was dripping onto the ground. At that moment, the man with the eye patch chanted a spell and forcefully struck the ground with his walking stick. The spiritual eyes perceive, each possessing clear understanding. Hurry, hurry, in accordance with the law and order. Release. Thud. Whoosh. Instantly, the space around the walking stick distorted, and along with it, the man's figure, which had been completely hidden from sight, was revealed. Startled, the man leaped backward, attempting to cast another magical technique. However, clap, 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 Lien, Buying, Jia, Zhen. As the hand seals of the 9-character activating method were formed, the man's feet stuck to the ground. At the same time, his body went limp, and strength drained from him. The man's eyes widened. To perform a technique of this level with just hand seals? Magical techniques are completed through various combinations. Mantra, talisman, word, seal, instrument. These 5 elements harmonize exquisitely to form a technique. Diviners with low proficiency need to utilize all 4 methods to achieve a technique, but those with higher levels of mastery can reduce them. At least level moon or above. Diviners receive 6 levels of titles based on their proficiency. From top to bottom, they are divine, sun, moon, technique, profound, and conveying. The man was certain. This man with the eye patch was a diviner with an extraordinary level of mastery in magical techniques, at least at the Fengyu level or above. The man spoke with extreme tension. I am Mo Go, the diviner assassin of the ghostly spirit pavilion. You are. Grip. Ugh. Before he could finish his sentence, the man with the eye patch grasped the mouth of the ghostly spirit pavilion's diviner assassin, who had identified himself as Mo Go, with one hand. Then, curling the corners of his mouth in a sinister manner, he spoke. How dare you interfere with the actions of our primal killing pavilion? You must have been prepared to die. Primal killing pavilion? Unfortunately, his ominous assumption had been correct. A group of diviners who, despite being members of the 64 diviner sects, had joined a massive martial arts organization. That was none other than the Primal Killing Pavilion. ******. Meanwhile, at the same time. Clang clang clang. The sound of clashing weapons filled the area in front of the main hall. Thud. What is this? The Mok family brothers, led by Manor Master Mok Indan, emerged from the room, unable to hide their bewilderment. The interior of the Yun Mok Sword Manor, which had been peaceful just moments ago, had turned into a battlefield. The warriors of the Yun Mok Sword Manor and the unidentified masked individuals were entangled in combat, and it was difficult to fathom how this situation had unfolded. Madam, what in the world is going on? The manor master asked Lady Suk, the first wife, who was standing helplessly in front of the main hall. The vassals and the inner manor master, Zhang Myanyin, were engaged in battle with the masked individuals, so the only ones he could ask were her and the second wife, Lady Zhang. In response, Lady Suk spoke with a perplexed expression. I don't know. It hasn't been long since the outer courtyard guard suddenly shouted about an enemy attack, and in an instant, the masked individuals rushed in, resulting in this situation. Sister-in-law is right. It happened so abruptly that we, too, are at a loss. At the wife's words, the manor master's expression darkened. Even if it was a surprise attack in the middle of the night, for them to possess the strength to swiftly break through the defensive line of the Yun Mok Sword Manor's outer courtyard and push their way in, they were no ordinary individuals. Xing. Manor Master Mok Indan drew his sword with his unfamiliar left hand. Although he didn't know who these people were, it was too much for the vassals and warriors to handle alone. The manor master unleashed a powerful roar, raising his sword energy. Who dares to invade the great Yun Mok Sword Manor? You must be prepared to forfeit your lives. Wah wah. At the sight of the manor master, the warriors confronting the masked individuals let out a cheer. With their lord, who had been bedridden for a long time, making an appearance, their morale couldn't help but soar. Let's go. Let's protect the Yun Mok Sword Manor. Swoosh. As Manor Master Mok Indan took the lead and leaped forward, the Mok family brothers and the two wives from martial arts backgrounds were also inspired and followed behind him, shouting, "Protect the Yun Mok Sword Manor." Of course, not everyone participated. Mok Jiongun was the only one who didn't join the battlefield. He naturally pretended to follow along, then slipped to the side and moved to a place with few watchful eyes. It's about time to leave. There was no need for him to defend this place. He didn't care whether they fought the masked individuals and died or not. Only one thing bothered him. The scar. The scar on the side of Manor Master Mok Indan's body. It resembled that mark. He wanted to ask how he had acquired it, but coincidentally, an incident had occurred. Should I help? He was in a dilemma. At that moment, Mok Jiongun felt a strange sense of fulfillment. This is... It was none other than the energy of death. Mok Jiongun closed his eyes, exhaled deeply, and savored the rapidly increasing energy of death. Excellent. It seemed that a considerable number of people had died in a short period. Otherwise, there was no way the energy of death would be overflowing from all directions like this. Thus, he couldn't possibly ignore it. I want to absorb it. Opportunities like this were extremely rare. However, masked individuals were popping out from various places, so if he let his guard down even for a moment, it could be dangerous. Swish. At that moment, someone appeared beside him. It was a beautiful woman with an alluring appearance, the protector Go Chan who had taken over Ha Chiren's body. Young master. Are you all right? He had hurriedly searched for Mok Jiongun due to the sudden attack. Finding him wasn't too difficult since their fates were connected. In response, Mok Jiongun chuckled and said, "This is perfect. Can you guard me for a moment?" Pardon? Then, I'll leave it to you. With those words, Mok Jiongun sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. He then began absorbing the energy of death, which was continuously flowing from the surroundings, through the reverse breathing technique. No. What is he doing? At this sight, Go Chan was momentarily dumbfounded. Even if he had no attachment to this Yun Mok Sword Manor, was he out of his mind, or was he truly this audacious? To think of circulating energy in a place that was no different from a battlefield. However, Go Chan had a sense of why Mok Jiongun was doing this. He's absorbing not energy but this? Although he had possessed Ha Chiren's body, Go Chan was a vengeful spirit. Therefore, he possessed the eyes of the spirit and could see the energy of the deceased rapidly being absorbed by Mok Jiongun from all directions. In the eyes of the spirit, the yang energy or life force of living humans appeared clear and warm. However, Mok Jiongun's appearance as he absorbed the energy of death was nearly the opposite. Is he really human? To think he would discover this fellow's true nature only after dying. For some reason, he became even more frightening. At that moment. Swish. Huh? Suddenly, a hulking monk wearing a skull prayer bead necklace appeared from somewhere. It was the demonic monk who had possessed the body of the Outer Manor Master. But why had the demonic monk reappeared in the form of a vengeful spirit? Oh my! Momentarily startled by the sudden appearance, Go Chan recalled that Mok Jiongun had mentioned having another spirit servant besides Chong Ryong. I clearly heard that he had possessed the Outer Manor Master's body. Go Chan asked in bewilderment. Could it be that you are senior demonic monk? The demonic monk nodded and said something. It sounded a bit mumbled, but Go Chan understood what he was saying. You lost your body to a powerful opponent? Losing one's body meant that the possessed body had been defeated? As far as Go Chan knew, the Outer Manor Master Sang Unbaek was a supreme master at the early stage of the Peak Realm. But if he had lost his body, just how powerful was the opponent? Crunch. Ugh. At that moment, along with the sound of something being crushed, a death cry rang out, and a large man with a thick sword of the Taoist sect slung over his shoulder and a body covered in scars jumped over the pavilion. He exuded an ominous aura, and the demonic monk frowned and pointed at him with his finger. What? That man? Was he saying that man had killed the demonic monk's possessed body? As they were conversing, the eyes of the scarred man and Go-chan met. At that moment, flinch. What? The keen senses of Ha Chai-ren, who had reached the pinnacle of peak realm, were strongly warning him. They were telling him that the man before his eyes was an extraordinary master. If Ha Chai-ren's body was instinctively on extreme alert to this extent, just how high was his level of mastery? It was impossible to gauge. Chapter 45. Ambush. Part 2. Whoosh. The amount was incomparable to the energy generated by the death of a single person. The death energy created by the deaths of dozens of people was not only vast in quantity but also deep in purity. This was because it contained all the negative emotions at the very moment of death. Excellent. While circulating energy using the reverse breathing technique, it was far more than when he had absorbed the energy of the malevolent spirit, Du Yeo of the two demons and two spirits. This was unexpected. The risk he had taken was worthwhile. At this rate, he seemed likely to achieve his goal faster than originally anticipated. Twice. No, perhaps even 3 times. It was about expanding the diameter of his danjian. He was concentrating the high-purity energy flowing in through energy circulation, and if done well, it might be possible to triple it. Of course, he had no idea what level of internal energy this corresponded to. As Mok Jiangnan focused on circulating energy, Go-chan, who was tasked with guarding him, was extremely tense. It's reckless. If Ha Chai-ren's body, which had reached the pinnacle of peak realm, was on such high alert, there was no chance of victory. Where did such a monster appear from? At that moment, the scarred man shifted his gaze from Go-chan to Mok Jiangnan, who was immersed in energy circulation. Then, with an intrigued expression, he spoke. Engaging in energy circulation amidst the chaos of an unknown enemy's appearance and the spilling of blood. What an interesting child. He then began to approach with long strides. It looked like he was merely walking, but he swiftly closed the distance from the pavilion in just a few steps. Gasp. Startled, Go-chan felt it was futile and called out to Mok Jiangnan, young master. He wanted to shake him and tell him to come to his senses, but if he accidentally disrupted him during energy circulation, it could lead to chi deviation. Young master? Go-chan called out to Mok Jiangnan once more. However, there was no response. Instead, he seemed to be in a state of self-transcendence, accelerating his energy circulation even further. Whoosh! All the surrounding death energy was visibly being absorbed at a tremendous speed, making it difficult to interrupt the process midway. In the end, Go-chan concluded that his only option was to buy time. Come to think of it, he was already dead. He couldn't let Mok Jiangnan come to harm out of concern for the possessed body getting injured. Whoosh! Go-chan sent energy to his feet acupoint and stomped his foot. At that moment, Ha Chai-ren's possessed body shot forward at an incredible speed. It was incomparably faster than his original body. Tap 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 tap. In an instant, he circled the scarred man's vicinity twice. Ho ho. Quite fast indeed. The scarred man muttered. However, it didn't sound like praise at all, and he wasn't even assuming a defensive stance. Go-chan bit his lower lip. He's looking down on me, isn't he? Flying kill martial arts, third stance, engraving silent performance. A martial arts technique naturally came to mind. The unique martial art that Flying Killing Yama's guest took pride in, the Flying Kill martial arts third stance, engraving silent performance, instinctively unfolded from his body. Swoosh 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 swoosh. Go-chan somersaulted in the air and unleashed his leg techniques towards the scarred man. 6 windmill-like kicks accurately targeted the vital points along the center line. He thought the man would dodge or block them in some way, but... Shudder! Suddenly, startled by the sharp killing intent, Go-chan twisted his body to the side. Swish! Severed strands of hair scattered in all directions. When? If he had been a moment later, that huge Taoist sword would have sliced his body in half. As he twisted his body, Go-chan threw 3 lustrous jade flying needles, which he had drawn from his bracelet, towards the face of the scarred man. Swish swish swish. Clang clang clang. However, the man easily deflected them with his Taoist sword. Moreover, as if that wasn't enough. Thud. Ugh. With an invisible angle, he accurately struck Go-chan's abdomen with his left fist. Go-chan let out a dying scream as he was sent flying backward, tumbling several times. Thud thud thud. Cough. Blood flowed from his mouth as he coughed. The difference in skills was evident after just a single exchange. However, Go-chan's eyes gleamed with surprise. It wasn't because the scarred man was incredibly strong, but because the pain from that strike wasn't agonizing. What is this? Strangely, his stomach churned, and he felt nauseous. Yet, the sensation of pain itself was still absent. Because of this, Go-chan could recognize that he was possessing someone else's body. It feels strange. But now wasn't the time to dwell on this peculiar feeling. Go-chan trembled as he raised his body. Even if the sensation of pain itself was absent, the fact that his body had suffered an impact remained unchanged. Thus, his legs wouldn't properly support his weight. Woman. If you try to stop me one more time, you'll die. The scarred man warned in a low voice. Those words made Go-chan feel somewhat offended. Who are you calling a woman? Stop right there. Swish swish swish. At that moment, someone shouted and leaped forward. He then blocked Go-chan's path and aimed his sword at the scarred man. It was none other than Mok Yuchion. Young Master Mok? Miss, are you alright? Huh? At those words, Go-chan's expression turned blank. Goosebumps were about to rise all over his body. Glancing at the dumbfounded Go-chan, Mok Yuchion spoke with a forceful tone. Ahem. Miss, please step back as it's dangerous. I will handle this man. As a man, he could tell. Mok Yuchion was putting on quite a show. Because of that, Go-chan couldn't bear the cringe. Regardless, Mok Yuchion politely bowed to the scarred man, perhaps to make a good impression, and said, I am Mok Yuchion, the 4th son of the Yun Mok Sword Matter. May I ask for what reason you have entered our clan and caused this commotion? At Mok Yuchion's words, the scarred man chuckled. Then, he looked Mok Yuchion up and down and spoke. Interesting. To think I would encounter 2 promising individuals in a place like this. What do you mean? Young lad. You have no right to question me. With those words, the scarred man exuded a strong oppressive aura. He merely revealed his killing intent, but Mok Yuchion's heart raced. Strong. As a supreme master at the early stage of the peak realm, Mok Yuchion could gauge how powerful the man before him was. Perhaps he was a master on par with his father before he lost his arm. It had been a long time since he felt such trembling. The scarred man then asked him, Mok family. Where is your father? Do not address my father so casually. Mok Yuchion raised his voice, seemingly angered by the scarred man's words. Seeing his reaction, the scarred man smirked and said, Don't shout. Trying to conceal your fear only makes you appear weaker. What? Unable to restrain himself, Mok Yuchion leaped forward, intending to unleash his sword technique. So naive. To be provoked by such a trivial taunt. Swish. In an instant, as if the ground had pulled him, the scarred man's figure reached Mok Yuchion's front. What speed? It was imperceptible. The startled Mok Yuchion tried to twist his body to the left and change the trajectory of his sword technique. At that moment, the man's hand moved as flexibly as a snake, reaching towards Mok Yuchion's face. Huh? Mok Yuchion hastily raised his left arm. The man's palm lightly touched his wrist. The instant it made contact, a majestic energy penetrated, and Mok Yuchion's body was sent flying as if it were a feather. Bam! Ugh! The force was so strong that he flew more than 5 zhang before coming to a stop. Mok Yuchion tumbled several times on the ground and spat out blood. Cough. Even though he had tried to circulate his body's protective energy upon contact, the opponent's internal energy had penetrated his viscera. It was a high-level emission technique called penetrating force. It exhibited exceptionally effective power against martial artists weaker than oneself, and Mok Yucheon was such an existence to the scarred man. To not even be treated as an opponent. The Taoist sword he held in his right hand remained slung over his shoulder. The gap was too overwhelming. However, he couldn't give up here. This situation wasn't a friendly spar or training. A real battle. This man was an enemy who had invaded the Yun Mok sword matter. If he yielded here, it would be the end. Mok Yucheon regulated his breathing and raised his body. Then, Go-chan approached his side, assuming a bow stance, and said, "Young master. We need to attack together." "Miss? This bastard?" For a moment, Go-chan felt the urge to tell him not to call him miss, but he let it go. It was only natural since he was possessing a woman's body, and now wasn't the time to quibble over forms of address. As the two of them prepared to launch a joint attack, the scarred man grinned sinisterly. What foolish actions. With that, he attempted to take a step towards them. It was at that very moment. "Ha!" With a resounding shout, someone appeared and brought down a single strike on the scarred man. The scarred man, who hadn't fully unleashed his abilities when facing the two of them, grabbed his Taoist sword and swung upward. Clang! The clash of sword and blade reverberated in all directions. The energy of the two supreme masters was so strong that fierce winds swirled around them. However, even between them, there was a disparity. Bam! The one who had delivered the downward strike was eventually sent flying backward, pushed back by about 5 steps. Fa father! That person was none other than the manor master of the Yun Mok sword matter, Mok Indan. Drip drip. Black blood trickled from the corner of Mok Indan's mouth. Having risen from his sickbed not long ago, he had expended a significant amount of true energy, and being unaccustomed to using his left hand, he couldn't even muster half of his prime strength. "Father!" As Mok Yucheon tried to approach, Mok Indan extended his hand and shook his head. "Stand back. He's not your opponent." "But..." "Ah." With those words, Mok Indan's eyes glanced at Mok Jyangun, who was sitting cross-legged and circulating energy. Why was that child doing that? Was he injured? He appeared to be fine on the outside. After a moment of puzzlement, Manor Master Mok Indan shifted his gaze to the approaching scarred man and spoke. "Who are you to invade our clan?" "Invade? Ha 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 ha." At this question, the scarred man burst into laughter and took something out from his bosom. Seeing it, Mok Indan's expression instantly hardened. It was none other than a seal. A seal? Mok Yucheon's eyes narrowed. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed to be a seal, but why was his father so startled? As they pondered, the scarred man tossed the seal upward and caught it repeatedly, then spoke. "You should know well what this is, Manor Master Mok. How did you obtain that?" "How, you ask? Ha 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 ha. Manor Master Mok, you're quite the actor. To say such a thing after arbitrarily seizing that, which is no less than our society's treasure." "Seize?" Mok Yucheon looked at Mok Indan with an expression of incomprehension. At that moment, a shocking revelation emerged from Mok Indan's mouth. "Are you from the Heaven and Earth Society?" In response to this question, the scarred man grinned. It was a sign of affirmation. At this, not only Mok Yucheon but also Go-chan's eyes widened. The reason for their astonishment was simple. The Heaven and Earth Society. It was one of the colossal forces that currently divided the martial arts world of the Central Plains into 3 factions. Revering only the existence of the strong, they had once plunged the martial arts world into chaos, claiming to unify it. At that time, countless wandering warriors had lost their lives. Thus, the martial arts world still couldn't help but tremble in fear upon hearing the name of the Heaven and Earth Society. The Heaven and Earth Society? Go-chan was dumbfounded. No wonder there weren't many forces that would dare to commit such a brazen act against the Yun Mok Sword Matter, a renowned martial arts family in Anhui Province. But if it was truly the Heaven and Earth Society, it was a grave situation. No matter how much the Yun Mok Sword Matter had gained fame as a martial arts family, if they were determined to attack, they would have to be prepared for the annihilation of their clan. Ah! A sigh escaped from Manor Master Mok Indan's mouth. To think it would be the Heaven and Earth Society. Mok Indan's gaze turned to his youngest son Mok Yucheon, Mok Jiangun, who was circulating energy, and the warriors of the Yun Mok Sword Matter fighting nearby. Is this my karma? Why had he been greedy back then? If only he hadn't brought that thing, such a situation wouldn't have occurred. Mok Indan spoke with difficulty. If we hand that over, will you withdraw from our clan? Father? At those words, Mok Yucheon looked at Manor Master Mok Indan with surprised eyes. Although the Manor Master's words were meant to save everyone, they were almost equivalent to surrender. His heart ached at the sight of his father's weakened appearance, which he had never witnessed before. I shouldn't have revealed the identity of our society. I was hoping for a bit more resistance. The scarred man muttered as if he was disappointed. Seeing his attitude, Mok Yucheon couldn't hide his inner fury. Unless they looked down on them to an extreme degree, they wouldn't display such an attitude. Manor Master Mok Indan sent a glance and shook his head. It meant not to act rashly. Even if you're angry, endure it, my son. The opponent is the Heaven and Earth Society. In any case, the situation was extremely unfavorable from the moment such a monster had arrived. Apart from being weakened, even if his body were intact, Manor Master Mok Indan had no confidence in handling the scarred man. The scarred man rested his Taoist sword on his shoulder and asked, "Where is it?" "That thing." "Let's make a promise, man." "Make a promise, man to man, first," Mok Indan demanded. The scarred man replied, "Manor Master Mok, you're not lacking in capacity as a leader." "Very well. I, Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, one of the 5 kings of the Great Heaven and Earth Society, shall make a promise. If you hand that over, I will refrain from causing further harm to the Yun Mok Sword Matter and withdraw." One of the 5 kings. Mok Indan was inwardly astounded. To think that Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, one of the 8 executives leading the Heaven and Earth Society, had made a move. If that were the case, there was no doubt he had come with the intention of annihilating the clan if things went awry. At this realization, cold sweat trickled down Mok Indan's back. The scarred man, or rather, Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, one of the 5 kings of the Heaven and Earth Society, asked, "Where is it?" In response to that question, Mok Indan pointed somewhere and said, "Over there lies our clan's medicinal hall. Among the herb containers in the medicinal hall, if you open the drawer marked with 5 elements, an underground entrance will be revealed. Ho ho. Inside, there is a stone door engraved with the character Zhong. The passage contains mechanical traps, so you must either break through 20 steps at once using lightness skills or traverse by grasping the ceiling. Well hidden indeed. In that place, there should be a wooden box with talismans attached to it. Did you hear that?" Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, asked one of the masked individuals beside him. "Yes," the masked individual replied. "Bring it." "Understood." The masked individual promptly vanished in the direction of the medicinal hall. "He said it's hidden in a secret space inside the medicinal hall?" Go Chan furrowed his brow with a perplexed expression, surreptitiously glancing at Mok Jiangun, who was still absorbing the death energy. He had a feeling that things were becoming thoroughly entangled. Chapter 46. Ambush. Part 3. The fight between the warriors of the Yun Mok Sword Matter and the masked individuals was temporarily halted by the shout of Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, one of the 5 kings of the Heaven and Earth Society. However, it was still not a situation where they could let their guard down. The Heaven and Earth Society remained a violent organization that had not abandoned its ambition to unify the Central Plains, so if the Bright Blade King Sun Yun were to change his mind midway, the battle would resume. "This is serious," Lady Suk, the first wife, whispered to the guard Hoang. From what she had heard, it seemed that they were after a secret manual or something similar that the manor master had found somewhere, and it was said to be in a hidden space within the medicinal hall. Glance. She surreptitiously glanced at Mok Jiangun, who was still circulating energy. That child. It appeared that he had found the manor master's exclusive secret manual in the medicinal hall. Otherwise, how could he have bargained with her while never leaving the medicinal hall? At this, the guard Hoang said to her, "Madam, shouldn't we inform the manor master about this?" "We should, but..." Lady Suk's eyes took on a peculiar expression. If she were to consider the future of the Yun Moksword Manor, informing the manor master now would allow him to quickly address the situation. However, a clever idea crossed Lady Suk's mind. "That child said he had only given me 2 stances of the ignited wood sword formation and that the rest of the oral formulas were all in his head." If that were the case, given that cunning fellow's personality, there was a high probability that he had also memorized and destroyed the secret manual. She was convinced that was likely the case. Then, there was no need to inform the manor master right now. If someone had memorized a secret manual precious enough for the Heaven and Earth Society to consider it a treasure, how would they react? "I think it will be fine to inform him a little later," Lady Suk said, the corners of her mouth curling up slightly. If things went well, she might be able to rid herself of a troublesome tumor here. As the situation had progressed to this point, Mok Jiangun, who had been immersed in the energy circulation, finally opened his eyes. "Young master," the guard Go Chan, who had been standing guard beside him, called out in a low voice. Mok Jiangun glanced at him once, then surveyed the surroundings. Seeing the situation in a standstill, Mok Jiangun smacked his lips as if disappointed. No wonder the death energy was cut off midway. It was because the fighting had ceased. Mok Jiangun was actually disappointed that no more people were dying. However, it seemed that assessing the situation took priority at the moment. What happened? Come to think of it, why was the demonic monk in the form of a vengeful spirit, abandoning the body of the outer manor master? Well, as Mok Jiangun looked puzzled, Go Chan whispered in his ear, explaining what had transpired. Mok Yucheon glanced at Mok Jiangun with a somewhat envious gaze. When did that bastard acquire such a guard? He had never seen Go Chan before, so he couldn't help but be curious when he was introduced as Mok Jiangun's guard. Not only was his appearance outstanding, but Mok Yucheon was particularly amazed by his martial arts prowess. Regardless, having grasped the situation to some extent, Mok Jiangun stroked his chin and let out a soft groan. What are you going to do about this?" Go Chan looked at Mok Jiangun with a perplexed expression. It was literally a situation where they were caught between a rock and a hard place. Soon, the masked individual from the Heaven and Earth Society who had gone to search the secret place in the medicinal hall would return. When that happened, a catastrophe could unfold. "Young master, the Heaven and Earth Society is a truly dangerous organization. If we're not careful..." "Wait a moment. Yes?" While Go Chan was puzzled, Mok Jiangun approached Manor Master Mok Indan, who was waiting with an anxious expression. Mok Indan admonished him in a low voice. "If you're injured, just rest quietly. Right now, may I ask who inflicted that wound on your side?" "What?" Manor Master Mok Indan furrowed his brow at Mok Jiangun's sudden question. As if the uncertain situation ahead wasn't enough, why was this child asking such a thing? The manor master sighed and said, "Now is not the time to discuss that. There's nothing in the underground of the medicinal hall." At those words, the manor master was momentarily flustered and almost blurted out a response, but he managed to hold back and surveyed the surroundings with his eyes. The bright blade King Sun Yun was standing with his arms crossed, leaning against the wall and looking at him. Conscious of him, the manor master lowered his voice even more and whispered, "What do you mean by that? There's nothing in the underground of the medicinal hall, what on earth?" "It's exactly as I said. So, if you tell me where, how, and by whom you received that wound on your side, I will handle this situation." At Mok Jaeongun's words, Manor Master Mok In-dan's eyes turned fierce. Mok In-dan glared at Mok Jaeongun and said, "Did you perhaps go to the underground?" "Yes." "How did you?" "Huh." For a moment, he wanted to grab the back of his neck. How did this kid find out about that place and go there? And he couldn't understand why he was so fixated on this wound. But that wasn't what mattered right now. "Don't tell me you tampered with that? Please tell me first." "You." The Yun Moksword Manor was in a life-or-death crisis, so what kind of behavior was this? With anger surging, Manor Master Mok In-dan grabbed Mok Jaeongun's wrist. And applying force, he said, "Grip. Where is it? Tell me right now. The future of our clan is at stake. I can't tolerate your mischief in this situation." "Does it seem like mischief to you?" Manor Master Mok In-dan frowned. Was this really the same child he knew? He was gripping his wrist so tightly and imposing his authority, yet the child didn't avert his eyes at all and showed no sign of fear. "You." It was at that very moment. Tap 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 tap. A masked individual was seen rushing over in a hurry. Seeing this, Manor Master Mok In-dan's expression hardened. It was the masked individual he had sent to the medicinal hall. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened his body and said, "Did you find it?" "It's here." The masked individual knelt on one knee and respectfully presented an old wooden box with talismans pasted all over it. Sun Yun also received the wooden box with both hands, unable to hide his excitement. "It has returned to the hands of our society once again." Seeing this, Manor Master Mok In-dan asked Mok Jaeongun, "You. Did you lie to your father?" Otherwise, there was no way the wooden box would be there so intact. Mok In-dan, who had been worried that a big commotion would occur, let out a sigh of relief as the tension seemed to dissipate. If they took that and left, there would be no further damage. Click. At that moment, the Bright Blade King Sun Yun raised one eyebrow and opened the lid of the wooden box. It seemed he wanted to check if the contents were inside. However, whoosh! Instantly, an immense killing intent erupted from the Bright Blade King Sun Yun. The force was so strong that everyone, whether from the Yun Moksword Manor or the masked individuals, flinched for a moment. Why all of a sudden? Manor Master Mok In-dan, who had been feeling relieved, was baffled. Mok In-dan looked at Mok Jaeongun. Could it be that the contents were missing? "I did tell you." At Mok Jaeongun's words, Mok In-dan was not only angry but also dumbfounded. Was this kid really in his right mind? However, unlike him, there was one person who welcomed this situation. It was none other than Lady Suk, the first wife. Perfect. She had wondered if Mok Jaeongun hadn't tampered with the wooden box. But judging by that man's reaction, it seemed that wasn't the case. Now was the opportunity. Lady Suk took a step forward. And just as she was about to open her mouth, the Bright Blade King Sun Yun took something out of the wooden box with his thumb and index finger. It was an earring? It was a lavish earring made of jade and silver. There was only one, and it looked like something women would wear. Seeing this, Lady Suk couldn't hide her bewilderment. That was because it should have been in her jade ornament box. But why was it there? It was enough to make even ghosts wail. Wait, could it be? Startled, Lady Suk looked in the direction where Mok Jaeongun was. She had intended to look at Mok Jaeongun, but her eyes met with Manor Master Mok In-dan, who was standing next to him. Mok In-dan had an expression that asked what on earth was going on. And for good reason. Of all things, that one. It was one of the ornaments she had received as a gift from Manor Master Mok In-dan. It was only natural for Mok In-dan to show suspicion. As she was flustered, she noticed Mok Jaeongun chuckling and shrugging his shoulders beside him. "You." Only then did she confirm that it was Mok Jaeongun's doing. He was the only one who had gone to that place. At that moment, the Bright Blade King Sun Yun held up the earring towards Manor Master Mok In-dan and blatantly exuded killing intent as he spoke. "Manor Master Mo. What is this? Mok Indan was at a loss for words at that question. It was already a problem that the secret manual wrapped in the prayer beads was missing, but he couldn't say that the earring belonged to his wife. You've finally chosen to be punished. Xing. The bright blade King Sun Yun drew the Taoist sword he had been carrying on his back. The masked individuals followed suit. As they put away their weapons and drew their swords again, the warriors of the Yun Mok Sword Manor also pulled out their weapons with tense expressions. It was a situation on the brink of explosion. At that moment, Mok Jiangan shouted, "First Madam, when our clan is in danger, do you intend to keep your mouth shut and remain still? Isn't that earring yours?" Lady Suk was momentarily at a loss for words. She had already been at a loss because she knew it was her earring, but she hadn't expected Mok Jiangan to suddenly bring her into the situation. "You. What are you?" "Ho ho. So this earring belonged to the manor master's wife?" The bright blade King Sun Yun glared at Lady Suk as he spoke. Feeling fear from his sharp gaze and aura, Lady Suk staggered and took a step back. She waved her hands and said, "Warrior son. I think there's some misunderstanding. This is... Eldest Madam. You can end this without bloodshed, so why are you doing this? If you have the secret manual, please give it quickly." This bastard. At Mok Jiangan's shout, she felt like she was going crazy. She wanted to rip Mok Jiangan's mouth apart right then and there, but that monster-like supreme master from the Heaven and Earth Society, whom even the manor master couldn't handle, was glaring at her as if he would kill her, so she couldn't open her lips. Grip. Manor Master Mok Indan grabbed Mok Jiangan's wrist and urged him in a low voice. "Enough." "Pardon? What on earth are you doing? No matter how much she's not your birth mother, how could you? You're more naive than you look." "What? That woman even called a diviner to find out from your mouth where the manor master's exclusive secret manual was, and then she tried to have you killed. And you still think of protecting her?" At those words, Mok Indan's expression hardened. What in the world was this about? As he was perplexed, Mok Jiangan whispered with a curl of his lips. "So, you don't have to feel too guilty. If, by some stroke of luck, we can save everyone with the sacrifice of that one woman, wouldn't that be a good thing in its own way?" It was like a devil's tempting whisper. At this, Manor Master Mok Indan felt a chill run through his entire body. Chapter 47. Ambush. Part 4. Could this be described as merely a change? Mok Jiangan, who nonchalantly suggested sacrificing Lady Suk, who was, despite their poor relationship, still his mother in name, left Mok Indan momentarily shocked to the point of sending chills throughout his body. Beyond being different, it seemed as if he had become a completely different person. At that moment, Mok Jiangan whispered in a sweet voice. "She's a woman who left the manor master to die and tried to give everything to her own son. Is there any value in hesitating? This kid. Whether it was true or not wasn't important." Mok Jiangan was providing him with an emotional justification to make a cruel choice. It was a justification that could sufficiently tempt him, both as a leader trying to save a group and as a person. However, no. Mok Indan bit his lip firmly. And releasing Mok Jiangan's wrist, which he had been holding, he urged in a low voice. "I cannot trust your words. It's the truth. Even if what you say is true, I cannot say it's right to sacrifice someone to save others." And Manor Master Mok Indan looked at the face of Lady Suk, who was taking a step back. Her fearful eyes showed strong denial. He knew her well as his wife. If she had done something, she would have feigned ignorance rather than reacting like this. "As I thought, it's not. If that was the case, if that was your doing, let me tell you it was a foolish act." "A foolish act?" "Yes. And now is not the time to deal with you." Swoosh. With those words, Mok Indan tried to block the bright blade King Sun Yun, who was approaching Lady Suk. But before he could do so, crunch! Sun Yun, who had been walking towards her as if he was about to do something, tightly clenched the earring in his hand. Scattering the crushed earring on the ground, Sun Yun said, "It seems there is someone here who dislikes the Manor Master's wife." What? Overwhelmed by the intense killing intent emanating from Sun Yun, she stammered in a cold sweat. Sun Yun scoffed and said, "Someone among the Yun Mocksword Manor's inner circle either wanted to frame you or have you killed by borrowing someone else's blade." Borrowing someone else's blade to kill. It literally meant borrowing someone else's sword to kill. At Sun Yun's words, her tension dissipated, and her legs gave out, causing her to collapse to the ground. Sun Yun exuded killing intent and glared at the people of the Yun Mocksword Manor with sharp eyes, saying, "Do you think I'll fall for such a trick?" At those words, Manor Master Mok Indan gritted his teeth and sent a glare at Mok Jiangun. Look. This was the foolish act he had mentioned. If one looked at the bigger picture rather than focusing on the details, the situation would become apparent to some extent. What kind of culprit would leave their traces so blatantly? It was more like revealing that an enemy had left them. He made a bad move. No matter how cunning he tried to be, this was the limit of a scheme devised by a mere 17-year-old's mind. Mok Indan frowned at Mok Jiangun and whispered, "The situation has worsened. This can't go on. Hand it over." How unfortunate. What? I was hoping for good luck. Now is not the time for such words. It was at that very moment. Swish. The bright blade King Sun Yun swung his Taoist sword and beheaded one of the Yun Mocksword Manor's warriors. It happened so swiftly that there was no time to stop it. Bright blade King. Clang. Manor Master Mok Indan shouted in anger as he drew his sword. Sun Yun shrugged his shoulders and joked. "You're the ones who broke the promise, yet you're angry at me. I declare to the people of the Yun Mocksword Manor. Declare. Declare. Declare." His voice, infused with internal energy, echoed loudly like a reverberating sound. Those nearby covered their ears, agonizing over the ringing in their eardrums. He wasn't using his full strength. Mok Indan's expression darkened. During the earlier exchange of blows, he had underestimated Sun Yun's profound mastery of internal energy. Even if his body were intact, Sun Yun was not an opponent he could defeat. Regardless, Sun Yun continued his speech. "I'll give you one last chance. If you want to live, either hand over that thing. Or tell me who would benefit the most from the death of the Manor Master's wife." At his shout, the corners of Lady Suk's mouth trembled as she knelt on the ground, regulating her breathing. She hadn't expected to suffer such humiliation because of that damn Mok Jiangun. Originally, she had kept her mouth shut out of consideration for the Manor Master, but now that things had turned out this way, she was in no position to hold back. Lady Suk parted her lips. "Warrior son." Before she could finish her sentence. At that moment, someone raised their hand and shouted, "I know who did this." The one who shouted was none other than Hoang. Seeing her, Lady Suk closed her mouth approvingly. It was better for Hoang, the guard, to truthfully report the facts out of loyalty rather than Lady Suk herself. "You know who it is?" "Yes." The bright blade King Sun Yun wiped the blood from his Taoist sword and spoke in a voice filled with killing intent. "If it's a lie, you'll have to forfeit your life. If the first madam is harmed, it will also put the eldest young master of our clan in a difficult position. Therefore, there are those who would benefit in the succession structure." Although unintentional, the gazes of the Yun Mocksword Manor's warriors naturally divided between two individuals. They were none other than the second son, Mok Un Pyong, and the youngest, Mok Yu Cheon. As humans, it was inevitable for their gazes to momentarily shift. Mok Un Pyong shouted in surprise. What nonsense are you spouting now?" Mok Yu Cheon was no different. "How rude, guard Ho. Why would I do such a thing?" The two of them reacted with a sense of injustice. It was only natural for them to do so. After all, they hadn't committed the deed themselves. However, the curious thing was that not a single person looked at Mok Jayangan upon hearing Hoang's words. This manor master Mok Indan frowned. Judging by Mok Jayangan's attempt to bargain with him, if anyone had plotted something, it had to be this child. But when Hoang mentioned those who would benefit in the succession structure, no one among the Yun Mok Sword Manor's people looked at Mok Jayangan. That was because he had the least power and potential. At that moment, the bright blade King Sun Yun alternately glanced at the second son, Mok Un Pyong, and the youngest, Mok Yu Cheon, and spoke. It sounds plausible, but how can I believe that? There is something that can be considered evidence. Evidence? Ho ho. Do tell, woman. Evidence? At the guard Hoang's words, Lady Suk furrowed her brow. Was there anything that could be considered evidence? As she wondered, Hoang said. In the underground of the medicinal hall, along with the item Hiro-san is looking for, there were also secret manuals that only the manor master of the Yun Mok Sword Manor could cultivate. The one who possesses them must have been behind this. At Hoang's words, two individuals simultaneously failed to hide their bewilderment. They were the youngest, Mok Yu Cheon, and Lady Suk, who possessed the original secret manuals, the Ignited Wood Heart Transformation Method and the Ignited Wood Sword Formation, albeit only the cover and 2 pages. Startled, they shouted simultaneously, "No! Hoang, you!" Having shouted at the same time, they realized their mistake as attention focused on them and became flustered, not knowing what to do. They shouldn't have reacted like this to Hoang's words. It was obvious that they would search their residences. Huh. Seeing their reaction, Manor Master Mok Indan looked at Mok Jayangan. Mok Indan's eyes trembled at the sight of Mok Jayangan, who was looking at the scene as if it were an entertaining spectacle. If, by some stroke of luck, we can save everyone with the sacrifice of that one woman, wouldn't that be a good thing in its own way? How unfortunate. I was hoping for good luck. The words Mok Jayangan had spoken flashed through his mind. The luck this kid had mentioned wasn't the kind of meaning he had understood. You. Mok Jayangan whispered with a smile on his lips. This is quite a big problem. Instead of ending it with one, everyone is getting involved. At this rate, whether it's the secret manual or whatever, that scary fellow might go on a rampage and kill everyone. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. What? You want me to put this earring in that wooden box? Yes. Are you stupid, mortal? What do you mean? If you put it in there, who would believe it was that old mortal woman? They would suspect it was the doing of someone targeting that Lady Suk or whatever her name is. Yes. That's the intention. What? Why do you think I gave them the secret manual that's practically just a shell? You. Don't tell me? Let's just say it's a small precaution in case the manor master wakes up. Well, it's a harmless prank. A harmless prank? You sure know how to use your wits. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Originally, it was a precaution in case the manor master woke up and checked the secret place. Although it differed from his intention, thanks to that, the chaos intensified. Mok Jayangan curled the corners of his mouth and said, rather than regretting after losing one or two, wouldn't it be better to tell me about that wound now? Clench. Manor Master Mok Indan gritted his teeth. This bastard, what on earth? The thought of him being his son had disappeared. He had never encountered someone so terrifyingly cunning. Seeing Mok Jayangan hold the danger to the Yun Mok Sword Manor hostage to obtain what he wanted left Mok Indan not only dumbfounded but also exasperated to the point of feeling nauseous. What will you do? There was no longer any room for choice. Mok Indan said. Bring the secret manual and hand it over to that man. Then I will tell you. That's not how a negotiation works. You really? We don't have much time. Mok Indan, who had been glaring at Mok Jayangan with a distorted face, parted his lips with trembling cheeks. 17 years ago, in Yongmun, Guangdong Province, I suffered this wound from the one called the Ghost Blade. Ghost Blade? You. Don't tell me you don't know the Ghost Blade? There was no way he would know. Mok Jaehyun, who had only recently started learning martial arts, had no way of knowing about the ecology of the martial arts world. Who was the ghost blade? Before he could finish his sentence, jingle jingle. The sound of bells ringing could be heard. In an instant, everyone's gaze turned towards the source of the sound. Diviner Zhou. The bright blade King Sun Yun called out to someone entering the pavilion. It was a middle-aged man wearing an eye patch with a snake design and holding a walking stick. However, more puzzling than this man's appearance was the fact that the bells at his waist were ringing on their own, without even shaking. What on earth? As they pondered, the middle-aged man with the eye patch, called Diviner Zhou, spoke. An evil spirit is playing tricks. An evil spirit? The evil spirit is trying to steal a human's shell. Pack. At that moment, the middle-aged man swung his walking stick in the air and formed a hand seal with his left hand, chanting a spell. The divine must move swiftly, the loyal and righteous protect the emperor. The self is at peace, the demons are subdued. The 5 peaks and the venerable lord, hurry, hurry, in accordance with the law and order. Boom. As soon as the spell ended, the middle-aged man struck the ground with his walking stick. Along with it, an invisible shockwave was generated, and a strong wind suddenly blew through the surroundings. Whoosh! Aarg! Then, Hoang, Lady Sook's guard who was hit by the sweeping wind, suddenly grabbed her head and screamed like a madwoman. Those around her couldn't hide their astonishment for a moment. Black veins bulged grotesquely around Hoang's neck, making it extremely bizarre. What? Thud thud thud. Hoang's eyes rolled back, and her entire body convulsed wildly. Everyone was startled and distanced themselves from her. Gulp gulp. Although not to the same extent as Hoang, there was one person who felt his stomach churning, Go Chan. The moment the wind swept by, he felt an unpleasant sensation and the urge to vomit. However, as soon as he circulated his internal energy and activated his body's protective energy, he felt somewhat better. Huff. Huff. Go Chan looked at Hoang. In Go Chan's ghostly eyes, he could see the demonic monk suffering in agony inside Hoang's body. Because the body was merely second-rate and he had just possessed it, he couldn't endure it. Eventually, Aarg. He was ejected from the possessed body. Hoang, who had been convulsing and suffering, collapsed on the spot as if she had fainted. Thud. Seeing this, the corners of the middle-aged man with the eye patch, called Diviner Zhou, curled up. I shall exorcise you. He then took out a talisman of the Imperial Command spell from his waist, attached it to his walking stick, and shouted. The true ghost is exterminated, the 5 peaks and the venerable Lord command. The divine soldiers lead the way, hurry, hurry, in accordance with the law and order. With that, he threw the walking stick. Swish. Surprisingly, the walking stick extended straight and flew like an arrow. To everyone's eyes, it appeared to be flying towards an empty space where no one was present, but the demonic monk was still there, staggering in pain. However, before the walking stick imbued with a mysterious power could reach the demonic monk. Pack. Someone caught the walking stick midway. You're doing something troublesome. It was none other than Mok Jaehyun. At this sight, the middle-aged man with the eye patch, Diviner Zhou, couldn't hide his astonishment for a moment. What? To catch a walking stick imbued with the Imperial Command spell and incantations with his bare hands, even if he was from a martial arts family, he was no ordinary person. However, what was truly astonishing wasn't that. Diviner Zhou frowned and glared at Mok Jaehyun, saying, You can see vengeful spirits. At those words, the surroundings stirred.